Hello everyone, welcome back, and today's special treat is a nostalgic road back to the past and growing up around St. Clair and Dufferin. Let's begin with the telling of the story and then a deep dive from my AI friends David and Angela. So, ready? Let's go.
The streetcars of St. Clair Avenue. Some people are born hearing the surf hit the turf on a beach near their home. Others listen to aircraft flying above them, their engines roaring past them on the way to far-off lands. I remember the steel wheels of streetcars rumble over the rails on St. Clair Avenue. On some slippery autumn or winter days I could swear I saw sand being deposited through a small pipe in front of the wheels of the carriage to help the streetcar climb up the steep icy hills of the street. During the week those red and white streetcars carried me to my high school, De La Salle, near Avenue Road. It was a private school with boys that wore ironic smiles behind their ties and blazers. We didn't know who we were until we proved ourselves on the ice or by the acumen of our academic prowess. We were misshapen monsters that needed to be shaped into adults that could function in a civil society. We were the future teachers, doctors and free thinkers that would save the world from mediocrity. In the classroom, on the ice and in the streets, we found solace in Jesus and the humble, self-sacrificing life he led, but, in the meantime, we had to look good. So we sported grey wool pants that reminded me of Sundays at St. Clair Church and the ominous Christmas present from my aunt every year. You guessed it, grey pants. My cousin always got a toy present from my mother, but my unimaginative aunt gave me grey pants. I have been wanting ever since this bleak part of my childhood showed me how infantile and envious we lowly creatures can be. Some things in life we can never forgive, yet we can forget by remembering the cruelty from the adults that ruled our world. Displaying the De La Salle logo boldly stitched into the pocket in the upper left corner of the blue blazer finally gave us some grounding. There were no identity crises at this school. We were De La Salle Christian soldiers and we were on a mission to save the world one hockey puck at a time. We took full advantage of the hockey arena on our premises. We lived and breathed hockey with the Jesuit brothers and classmates during gym, recess and after school. The brothers floated over the ice like black phantoms wearing the official garb of the Basilian Order. One of them that had glasses skated on the frozen water like a proud mercurial Jesus. They rarely wore helmets. The odd one borrowed somebody's hockey gloves. Jesus would protect them on and off the ice. We wore full hockey equipment just in case. We weren't in the same union the brothers belonged to. They had paid their dues long ago. How they managed to live without women as sexual partners is beyond my comprehension. We were fodder for their religious canon that shot us into the world to become purified of the sins of greed and licentiousness. All we ever dreamed of was meeting blonde girls from the affluent suburbs. They would save us from our brief existence in this chaotic world through the power of their sex. We were tired of books, working after school delivering TV guides and being barked at by our fathers and the incessant, banal preachers by priests and brothers that drank the best wine while hiding behind the translated texts of Seneca and Virgil. We wanted to die in the bosom of girls that planned to trap us in pleasure and sin. We wanted to take our last gasp of breath between the valleys and mountains of woman incarnate. I was a willing partner in this kind of sin, though nobody told me about the suffering and loneliness that went along with this uncharted territory of the female world. The stakes would be high but well worth the risk. I'm sorry, but religion and making vows to a creator that I couldn't see or touch seemed both futile and ridiculous. What I can see and ingest and feel with my heart is important in my mind. I would pet and kiss the girls behind the tombstones of the dead in the Mount Pleasant Cemetery near my house. I could not see the dead anymore, nor the creator that took back this life he so generously gave, so I ignored the existential threat of our mortality and leaned toward a philosophy of a human condition I could grasp with my senses. On the journey home from La Salle, I recall gazing at a maze of storefronts blurring past me as I sat on my solitary perch in a seat that gave me a window to a world that was still young and unfamiliar to me. The seemingly trite portrayal of mannequins in frozen expressions wearing odd fashions that never seemed to match exalted my naive view of the world. Except for the occasional display of suits and dresses celebrating communion and confirmation, these stilted dummies wore the same working plaid shirts, pants, boots, and shoes all through the year. Little plastic boys and girls wearing adult dresses and suits struck me as strange. They had nothing to do with me and lived in the sunny strips of light and shadow of a mediocre existence punished by time, dust, and suspended animation. They were born in a twilight zone of business entrepreneurs that was still alien to me. My world was full of light, sound and fun, playing ball hockey and skating on the rink at Earlscourt Park in winter and swimming in the cool pool in the summer. Yet in a universe dominated by adults, everything was permitted and perfectly acceptable if they called the shots. The 60s were a turbulent decade full of revolution. The world focused on toppling the fascists of the old guard. The self-proclaimed arbiters of authoritarianism in the schools, in the church and at home were soon to be extinguished by liberal thinkers like me. We were controlled and instructed by our parents, the odd uncle who drank too much, the priests, teachers and brothers and sisters of the church to behave as virtuous Catholics. Yet in truth we were in utter fear of corporal punishment that usually got out of hand and turned into beatings. I recall sisters jumping off chairs and flying through the air to strap unfortunate fourth graders. I still can see the face of the priest turn a beet red as he recoiled like a snake to bitch slap some insubordinate altar boys while I backed away in horror. I suppose the whole idea of child rearing was to suppress the natural spirit of children and enslave them to become the automatons that obeyed and never questioned the authority of the almighty gods that ruled the roost, the big people. I marveled at the mannequins in the clothing stores and identified with their species. Sometimes I envied them in their opaque, frozen imprisonment. They were safe and secure from the blazing inferno of hostility and hate that spewed from the men and the odd woman that hit us at home, school and church. Then there were the street fights that grew from some dare or ugly rumor into an all-out brawl. Something was wrong with the adults of the 60s and 70s. Unlike today, they taught us that violence was an acceptable way to solve conflicts. Besides being taught that if you spare the rod, you spoil the child, they should have been instructed on controlling their anger and hatred by reading Seneca. These days the pendulum has swung completely to the other side, and we can't raise our voices, let alone grab a kid and scold them for their abhorrent behavior. Just today I screamed at my son for his insolence when he spewed a long diatribe of obscenities that made my blood boil and my shoulders and ears cringe. I called him an imbecile. He asked me what it meant, and I said it meant he was talking like an idiot. I never talked like that when I was 12. I was busy reading about adventures on desert islands or solving mysteries with the Hardy Boys. By doing homework, playing hockey and listening to stories by adults, my time seemed endless and the future wide open. My attention was directly proportional to my eagerness to learn something new each day. I never backpedaled like the kids today. Kids today are much smarter than we were, but they feed on a fading train of ideas, unsupported by time, distance, and wisdom. They eat up everything spewed out by the internet and YouTube videos and regurgitate their knowledge in a litany of complaints and false entitlement. What they lack is a certain edge we had back then to slow down and absorb our culture by seizing the moment. I was in a constant mode of panic and terror when I had to go home and face my father's wrath over something that happened on the street or in school. It might involve some altercation that translated into ripped pants or staying out too late playing ball hockey. I had to find an escape from the oppressive conditions of my Catholic upbringing. I found it in the voyages on the streetcars of St. Clair Avenue. After the school year ended and the scorching days of summer drove everyone crazy on my street, we headed for Center Island and the cool waters of Lake Ontario. The same beaches today are havens for nudists and politically correct LGBTQ+ people. In the 60s, the Toronto Islands were a refuge for the inner city dwellers that were quarantined in cement and asphalt jungles abandoned by natural pastoral vistas and water, cold, beautiful, and wonderful H2O. Except for the few maple trees that provided shade for hot and thirsty kids, there was a natural tendency to seek out streams, rivers, and lakes. The ocean was in another orbit on the other side of the world as far as I knew. To get there you needed to travel by car, train, bus, or plane. All I ever knew was that the streetcar I used reached the end when it ran out of tracks. I had a dream once where I was in some strange, foreign city lost in a labyrinth of streetcar tracks. I never felt so alone and lost, but then I remembered how those same tracks could take me home again. I awoke to my familiar world, and I could hear the echo of the steel wheels screech along the tracks over the horizon and up to heaven. There was no corporal punishment up there, just long days of playing shinny with the bearded wonders like Jesus and Joseph, and me possibly teaching Castro how to skate so he could stop complaining about the imperialist United States. My father took streetcars for years to his job in New Toronto near Lakeshore and Kipling Avenues. In 1963 he bought a Pontiac Parisienne, and my dad took enormous care in parking it in the garage while backing it, inch by inch, from the narrow lane behind the house. One time he hit a wooden pole in High Park and blamed us for not warning him as he was backing up to turn the car around. Streetcars could never make a mistake like that. They rolled along on rails with a fixed route stopping on cement platforms. They were hooked up to the electrical cable above the streetcar with a steel rod that bobbed and weaved and spewed a rainbow of sparks that made them seem alive. A drunk and retired streetcar driver at Wasaga Beach once told me about a driver who went off the tracks near Oakwood and St. Clair and rammed the vehicle into the building on the corner, damaging the blocks which the city had to pay for. I would have liked to see that for myself. In my day everything ran in a smooth and orderly way. The fascist adults that held us as emotional hostages made sure of it. They would have hung that driver if it happened in my day. Now into my 60s, when people talk about saving the environment and lowering the carbon footprint by using the public transit system of the TTC, Toronto Transit Commission, my nostalgic thoughts turn back time to those days in the sun on my beloved voyages across the city. These days TTC means take the car for me. I shun the boisterous crowds chatting and tapping their cell phones, texting God knows who or what. These are the creatures that ride the rocket, an inaccurate euphemism for the TTC. What used to be a refuge, sitting in the streetcar watching the world go by, has evolved into a vehicle of trapped people gesticulating into handheld devices that makes me wonder why they are alive. I hide in my car and roll with these through cities, towns, and country without the use of public transit. The car means freedom and convenience despite the traffic jams and bad drivers. Nowadays the streetcars on St. Clair disappear below the street level, taking the lost generation to subway stations and underground malls in the shadowlands far from the sun. The soul-dead people of today shop in malls and live in a netherworld of retail caverns that spit out cinnamon buns and tasteless sandwiches and bottled water from Fiji. This is not the world I was born into. I was meant for the long endless days of the sun where streetcars took us to our schools and the islands in the lake. Space, time, and mortality worked for us, and we were transported to a timeless place in the soul that gazed at sunsets not as the end of the day but the start of a new day and a new adventure on the red and yellow streetcar with an open future of sunny days that would never end.
Well, thank you, Karen, for that lovely rendition of my story, The Streetcars of St. Clair. Now we're going to take a deep dive and a review by my friends David and Angela. So let's go.
All right, let's dive in, shall we? Today we're taking a trip back in time to 1960s Toronto.
Ah, the 60s.
Yeah, and our vehicle for this journey is, well, it's not a time machine exactly, more like a really evocative piece of writing called The Streetcars of St. Clair Avenue.
Interesting.
It's just an excerpt, but even from these few pages, you get this incredible sense of what it was like to experience the city from those iconic streetcars.
I'm intrigued already.
Me too.
Yeah.
And you know, what really struck me right away was how the author just plunges us right into their childhood.
Oh.
Yeah, they talk about those streetcar wheels rumbling down St. Clair, and I don't know if this actually happened or not, but they even imagine sand being sprinkled on the tracks for traction in the winter.
Huh.
It's those little details that really ground you in the scene. You know, you can almost hear the sounds and feel the era.
It's amazing how those sensory details can transport you back to a specific time and place.
Totally. And speaking of place, the author also mentions going to De La Salle, this all-boys Catholic high school.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and they describe it as being all about hockey and religious discipline.
Sounds intense.
Oh, it does. It paints a picture of a very specific time and place, you know.
I can only imagine.
But what's interesting is that within this kind of, structured environment, the author talks about finding solace in the teachings of Jesus.
That makes sense.
Yeah, but at the same time, they admit to yearning for a bit of rebellion, too.
Like a classic teenage dilemma.
Exactly. Especially when it comes to, girls, there's this sense of wanting to break free, to experience something beyond the walls of the school and those strict rules.
It's that universal push and pull of adolescence, isn't it? Wanting to belong, but also wanting to carve out your own path.
Totally. And that tension between conformity and rebellion actually kind of leads us to this other interesting theme that pops up, this fascination with mannequins.
Mannequins. That's a little unexpected.
I know, right? But the author describes being drawn to these figures in shop windows. They talk about how the mannequins seem so, I don't know, safe and unchanging, like they represent this world of order and perfection.
It's a curious connection to make, but maybe it speaks to a deeper longing for control in a world that felt at times chaotic.
Especially considering, what the author says about authority figures.
Like the priests and teachers at the school.
Yeah, exactly. They describe this pervasive fear of those figures and the ever-present threat of corporal punishment. There's even this, a disturbing image of a priest turning beet red with anger before striking an altar boy.
It's a harsh reminder of how societal norms around discipline have changed, wouldn't you say?
For sure. And it kind of highlights this hypocrisy that the author seemed to be surrounded by, adults preaching virtue while resorting to violence.
Right. Makes you wonder what kind of impact that had on their worldview.
No kidding. And it's in this context that the streetcar takes on a whole new meaning. It becomes more than just transportation.
You mean an escape?
Yeah, like a refuge from the pressures of home and school, a place where they could, just be themselves for a little while.
Interesting.
It reminds me of how the author describes their summer trips to Center Island.
Oh, yeah. Those were like these magical portals to another world. At least that's how they describe them.
Exactly. A chance to experience the freedom of the beach and escape the confines of the city. And what's funny is they actually contrast those beaches of the 60s with what you see today. Mm-hmm. It's almost like they're lamenting a lost innocence, a time when things felt simpler, more carefree.
It sounds like a classic case of nostalgia versus progress, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And that theme really comes through in this vivid dream the author describes.
A dream.
Yeah. They talk about being lost in a city of streetcar tracks, which sounds a little strange, but it's like a metaphor for that feeling of being lost in life, searching for your place in the world.
Ah, I see.
Yeah. And it's interesting because while the tracks represent this feeling of being lost, they also hold the potential for finding your way back, connecting to something familiar. It's this sort of, this push and pull, I guess you could say.
A tension between wanting to explore the unknown and yearning for the comfort of the familiar.
Exactly. And then we get this other kind of juxtaposition when the author talks about their father.
Wow.
Yeah, their father transitions from taking the streetcar to owning a car, which back then was a real symbol of, progress and upward mobility.
Of course, yeah.
But they also describe their father meticulously parking that car every night, like inching it back into the garage with this incredible care and precision.
It's an interesting detail, almost like he's trying to exert control over this symbol of progress, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, maybe. Or maybe it's just about taking pride in what you've accomplished. Either way, it makes you think about how our relationship with technology and even progress itself can be so complex.
It's rarely a simple equation, is it?
Not at all. And I think that complexity is exactly what makes this deep dive so fascinating. It's not just about streetcars or even 1960s Toronto. It's about exploring how our personal experiences shape our views of the world and understanding that there are always multiple perspectives on what it means to move forward.
Well said. And I have a feeling this is just the beginning of a very thought-provoking journey.
Me too. So buckle up, folks, because we're just getting started. Next stop. The changing landscape of the city, and what happens when those beloved streetcars start to disappear.
I can't wait.
And it's that idea of things disappearing that kind of leads us to this next part of the author's story. They talk about the modern streetcar literally disappearing, like going underground.
Huh, interesting.
Yeah, it's almost as if it's being swallowed up by progress, like this whole way of life is fading from view.
That's a pretty powerful image. The streetcar descending into darkness, leaving behind that sunlit world the author remembers.
Right. And what makes it even more poignant is how they contrast that with what they see replacing it, like those underground malls.
Ah, yes. Those sterile, climate-controlled spaces filled with...
tasteless sandwiches, they call them.
Right. And bottled water from Fiji.
There's a real sense of, disappointment there, right? Like a yearning for something more authentic.
Absolutely. It's about more than just the physical spaces. It's about the experiences they represent. Remember how the author talked about those sun-drenched beaches on Center Island?
Yeah. It's like they're clinging to those memories, those simpler times.
Exactly. A time before what they see as the soullessness of modern consumerism took over.
But maybe it's not even about the things themselves, but the pace of life back then. Like those streetcar rides, they weren't just about getting from point A to point B. They were about Well, slowing down and observing the city.
You're right. It was a different way of being present in the world. And those memories are even more vivid because they stand in such stark contrast to the author's experience of the city today.
Crowded, impersonal, everyone glued to their phones.
Exactly. It makes you wonder, what have we gained and what have we lost in this relentless pursuit of progress?
It's a big question. And the author, they actually highlight this shift with a pretty interesting anecdote. You remember the one about the drunk streetcar driver?
Oh yeah, that was a bit of a wild story.
It was. But what's striking is how the author contrasts the consequences of that mistake back then with what might happen today.
Because back then, something like that was a really big deal. Right?
Huge. It could cost you your job, your reputation. But now they seem to be saying people are so detached from their surroundings that they can just slip away into the anonymity of the crowd.
It's like the author is asking, have we sacrificed accountability at the altar of convenience?
Yeah, I think so. And it makes you think about how technology, while amazing in so many ways, can also create this distance between us and the world around us.
And it brings us back to those streetcar memories. They offer a glimpse of a different way of being, a reminder that it's possible to slow down, observe, connect.
To be more present.
Exactly. And isn't that something we all crave in this fast-paced, hyper-connected world?
For sure. And you know, there's also this sense of possibility that seems inextricably linked to those streetcars. Remember how the author describes those endless summer days, the feeling of the future stretching out before them?
Oh yes, that intoxicating blend of freedom and possibility that youth offers. It's almost tangible in their writing.
It is. And I think it's heightened by the fact that we're experiencing these memories through the lens of nostalgia. The author is looking back on this time with a sense of longing, recognizing that something precious has been lost.
But it's not just about personal loss, is it? There's a broader social commentary here, a critique of what we may have given up in the name of progress.
That sense of community, shared experience, just being present in the moment.
Exactly. It's like the author is holding up a mirror to our modern world and asking, are we really better off? Have we created a world that nourishes our souls, or have we sacrificed something essential in our quest for efficiency and convenience?
Those are some pretty heavy questions.
They are, but they're also essential questions to grapple with, especially as we consider what kind of future we want to build.
And as we approach the final stop on this journey through the author's memories, I'm really curious to see how they grapple with those questions. What will be the final takeaway from this ride on the St. Clair Avenue streetcar?
You know, as we reach the end of this excerpt, it's interesting how the author kind of brings us full circle.
How so?
Well, they leave us with this incredibly vivid image, that red and yellow streetcar fading into the sunset.
I see.
It's such a powerful metaphor, isn't it?
For what?
Well, for the passage of time, of course, but also for this feeling of something slipping away, something precious.
It is bittersweet, isn't it? The sun setting on an era, but also a new day dawning.
Exactly. And it makes you think about the author's own journey, you know. They've taken us from those bustling streets of 1960s Toronto all the way to these deeper reflections on progress and loss and what it means to truly connect with the world, right? It's been quite a ride, hasn't it?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we've felt the rumble of those streetcar wheels, sensed the author's childhood anxieties, even tasted those tasteless sandwiches in the underground mall. But more than that, it's made me question my own assumptions about what progress really means and what we might be sacrificing along the way.
That's the power of a good story, isn't it? It can transport you to another time and place, challenge your assumptions, and leave you with questions that linger long after the final page.
And you know, I think that's what makes this particular deep dive so powerful. It's not just about streetcars or even nostalgia. It's about understanding how our personal experiences shape our view of the world and recognizing that there are always multiple perspectives on what it means to move forward.
Absolutely. The author doesn't give us any easy answers, but they do invite us to examine our own relationship with the past and the present. How do we hold on to what matters most in a world that's constantly changing? How do we balance the allure of progress with a yearning for something more authentic, more human, maybe?
It's a tough balancing act, that's for sure.
It is. But as we step off this streetcar of memories, I'm left with this thought. Maybe progress isn't just about building faster subways or shinier gadgets.
Maybe it's about something more.
Maybe. Maybe it's also about preserving those spaces and experiences that allow us to slow down, connect with our surroundings, and just Well, remember what it means to be fully present in the world.
Well said, well said. And on that note, I think we've reached our destination. It's time to step back into the present, but with a renewed appreciation, I think, for those echoes of the past and the lessons they hold for the future.
Exactly.
So as you go about your day, dear listener, I encourage you to think about the journeys you've taken, both literally and figuratively. What are the places and experiences that have shaped your view of the world? And what stories do those journeys tell about who you are and where you're going?
It's something to ponder, isn't it?
It is. And until next time, may your journeys be filled with wonder and discovery and perhaps even a touch of nostalgia for those streetcars that once carried us through time.
Thank you for your time.